And with that, let's get to our one guest today as we go to our guest line. As promised, we bring on Joey Kaufman, Ohio State football beat writer for the Columbus Dispatch. Joey, thanks for coming on. How are you today?
Not doing bad. I appreciate you guys having me.
Well, we appreciate you coming on, and I know everybody around here wants to know what kind of quarterback they're getting in Kyle McCord. We'll get to that in a second, but my biggest question, and I've read a little bit about it, but I want to get your thoughts on it. Why did he leave Ohio State? Can you enlighten us in terms of why why Kyle McCord was even available in the transfer portal?
My colleague Bill Rabinowitz wrote a pretty good inside look this last weekend, which kind of lays out the reasons for the parting between Kyle McCord. I guess the long story short, I think I would encourage people to read that story because I think it lays it out in pretty good detail. But Kyle McCord was going to return as the starting quarterback next year at Ohio State without assurances that he would remain the starter. After the Michigan loss, he met with Ryan Day and looked for a guarantee that he would be back in place atop the depth chart, and partly because it was so soon after Ohio State's crushing loss to their arch rival, he didn't get that assurance from Ryan Day, and he would have gone into next year as a front runner to be the starter at Ohio State. He had beaten out Devin Brown the previous year before, and that competition could have been reopened, or Devin Brown could have just made a push in the offseason to make his claim for that job. But because Kyle McCord goes into next year with he only has 1 year of eligibility left, and because of that time crunch, he wanted to go to a place where he felt more secure in his place to be the starter, and that essentially prompted him to go into the portal.
Were you surprised at all that it ended up being Syracuse as the next school? I'm guessing a lot of Ohio State fans were trying to guess what the next school was for Kyle McCord, and it ends up being Syracuse.
It made some sense. Just he's a Northeast guy, and so that seemed like a potential fit. And obviously, the Syracuse staff has some New Jersey connections where Kyle is from, so that seemed to track. It seemed like Nebraska had also been a possibility last week that he had visited Lincoln, but I think overall it seems like a good fit for him going back to the Northeast and maybe being in a situation where it's not quite the pressure cooker that Columbus was for him, and just a lot of spotlight and scrutiny on him following 3 Heisman Trophy finalists at quarterback.
You know, Tim and I were both reading that, the family had a little bit of a bad taste in their mouth, and they feel as though that his red shirt was unnecessarily burned his freshman year. Did that play into this decision at all, that they felt like maybe Ryan Day didn't have their son's best interest in mind?
I think it played in their decision insofar as that this was crunch time. If Kyle McCord had a redshirt in 2021, he would have been a redshirt sophomore this year, and I think it would have created less urgency to have a guaranteed starting spot. And if he was going into 2024 with 2 seasons of eligibility left, maybe it's less pressing that he has to start next year. But I don't think that getting his redshirt burn probably helped. But I think the bigger issue with getting the redshirt burn was that it reduced his playing years he had left.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think it also is interesting now with just 1 year of eligibility. He decided on Syracuse, and he's putting a lot of faith in Syracuse that hopefully they can springboard him into the NFL. I'm also curious, just what was the Ohio State fan base's reaction initially when he went into the portal? Is this the type of player that the fan base was ready to bring back as the starter for next season if it came to that? And what was kind of the discussion amongst the fan base throughout the season about his play and overall how they felt about him?
I think it was sort of met with shrugged shoulders. I think the Ohio State fan base has become, so used to in recent years of having just elite quarterback play, and it's made, the standard that Kyle McCord had to live up to, a little bit of a challenge, because you're following a guy in C.J. Stroud, who was the number 2 overall pick in the NFL draft, is going to be the rookie of the year, and has brought the Houston Texans into playoff contention. That's a high bar to clear, and because everybody here had watched C.J. Stroud for 2 years, they'd watched Justin Fields and his dynamic playmaking for 2 years, brought Ohio State to the college football playoff final against Alabama, and Dwayne Haskins was a Heisman finalist too, though, for over 4,000 yards. I think they had become spoiled by just that quarterback play. And Kyle McCord was a very good quarterback, but he may not have been a quote-unquote elite quarterback or at least a Heisman Trophy finalist quarterback. And because of that, I don't think people were totally dejected when he went into the portal here. I think probably the overwhelming feeling was maybe a shoulder shrug, but also just sort of a curiosity element. I do think it caught people a little bit off guard because they were expecting that Kyle McCord would be back and curious what kind of development he could make maybe in a second year of a starter. But I don't think he had ingratiated himself in the fan base in such a way that they were just totally despondent about losing him.
Yeah, it's funny how two different fan bases can look at the same player so differently, right? You say Ohio State fans are just kind of shrugging their shoulders. Syracuse fans the last 24 hours are, throwing celebrations and looking at this guy as the savior, to this program. So with that being said, what kind of quarterback are they getting? Fill us in on his strengths, his weaknesses, and what Syracuse fans can realistically expect next year out of Kyle McCord.
He does have a pretty good arm, and it's not, maybe not what C.J. Stroud was in terms of the touch of the ball placement, but he can put some zip on a lot of throws. I think the other strength that Ryan Day would point out is his calmness under pressure. He led Ohio State, obviously that comeback drive at Notre Dame where they were down and needed to get in the end zone to win the game, and he helped them do that. Even against Michigan, they got behind early, and he helped them kind of get back and put them in a situation where they could have won that game. The thing that he had trouble with this year was the slow starts. He would get off to these slow starts, and maybe his footwork wasn't set. It felt like it took him maybe a quarter or so to get into the game. That's partly why they fell behind at Michigan, but he did a good job of maybe rallying from some of those early mistakes and would come back and finish games pretty well. So I think that's what you're going to get from Kyle McCord. I mean, look, he's a guy who threw for over 3,000 yards, top 20 nation in pass efficiency. I think for Ohio State fans, maybe he wasn't quite what C.J. Stroud was, but he's still, I think, in an upper tier of quarterbacks at the college level.
We're chatting with Joey Kaufman. He's an Ohio State beat writer for the Columbus Dispatch, talking about Kyle McCord committing to Syracuse. And Joey, a lot of the Syracuse fans are now focused on sort of what Syracuse is going to be next season and what could be a weakness with this team potentially, and something that has held them back maybe in the past has been the offensive line play. And it's still a little bit of a question mark. So I think a lot of fans want to know, how is Kyle McCord at managing a pocket, getting out of a pocket, handling pressure, and making throws maybe when the pocket is collapsing around him?
It was, I think, difficult for him at times this year because Ohio State's offensive line was rebuilt. They lost 3 out of their 5 starters from last year, had 2 new starting tackles, and he didn't always play well when under pressure. I do think the curiosity thing is he spent at least half the season dealing with a sprained left ankle, and at times his mobility was limited, and when you're trying to navigate a pocket on bad ankles, I think that certainly limited his ability to maybe evade pressure and set up. I don't think he's ever going to be somebody who's going to make plays outside of structure, but he is a pretty good athlete and has some legs. He kind of showed it earlier in the year against Indiana where he was able to run for a couple first downs and have some movement, but the ankle injury, I think, limited what we were able to see as far as his mobility. And I think if he's closer to full strength, he may be able to do a better job. But certainly, I think late in the season, certainly against Michigan, I think the pressure got to him.
Joey, I know something that Syracuse fans are curious about is the NIL portion of this. Do you have any idea, or can you ballpark it for us, maybe what you believe he would be commanding in the NIL market? Maybe, I know he looked at Nebraska as well. Do you have a feel for that number at all?
I don't have a great feel for it. I do know that when he went into the portal, one of the reasons was he felt as if he would be able to get more as a quarterback on the open market versus returning at Ohio State. And that was sort of the pitch to Ohio State, where he was trying to ensure that his NIL money was facilitated in a way that was going to be reflective on the value that he went on the transfer market and was going to be courted by schools. And Ohio State wasn't really over-eager to make that happen. So I think it's a big reason why he went in the portal. I don't have a great feel on ultimately how the dollars and cents worked their way out, but certainly he was looking for a pay bump going into next year.
We've talked a little bit about why he made this decision and how maybe he wasn't guaranteed a starting spot going into his last year of eligibility. I was reading some stuff talking about kind of how Ryan Day valued him or maybe some of the post-game comments that he was making. And obviously, like we've said, he was not Justin Fields. He wasn't C.J. Stroud, so it was kind of an uphill climb to begin with. But what was your perception of just what Ryan Day thought of Kyle McCord at the quarterback position?
Yeah, I do think you can go through and watch and listen to Ryan Day talk about Kyle McCord, even after being named the starter, even after kind of multiple starts. He was never really effusive in his praise with Kyle McCord, and I don't think that's really abnormal with the way he's spoken about his starting quarterbacks. I mean, as a former quarterbacks coach, he's still pretty hands-on with that position. He's still pretty demanding of that position, so I don't think that was all too surprising. What I think was notable was maybe as some of the fans and some of the, I think, just the public pressure on Kyle McCord kind of grew and grew. You didn't really quite see Ryan Day willing to go out on a limb and maybe back his quarterback or to publicly defend the quarterback in the same way that he did with C.J. Stroud. I remember after C.J. Stroud's second start, or maybe I think it was second start of his first year, they lose to Oregon at home. In the press conference the following week, Day goes out and it's very clear C.J. was not the reason we lost this game, yada, yada, yada. And I thought that was maybe different than what he ever did with McCord. And so I don't think he was ever maybe going out in the same way to defend McCord the same way he did with Stroud. It is interesting, though, because Day and McCord do go really far back. I mean, Day recruited him, handpicked McCord when he was still a sophomore at St. Joseph's Prep in Philadelphia, finishing his sophomore season in spring of 2019. That's when McCord committed to Ohio State. So they have spent several years in communication and working with him in the building, but you never really saw a lot of warm, fuzzy feelings publicly. But I will say that is just generally how Day has spoken about his passers.
Joey, last question. It's kind of a big picture question, not really related to Ohio State because this is happening everywhere. But we see that, the regular season comes to an end and all these guys hit the portal, and then these teams are playing a bowl game like a month later, and the bowl season's underway, and the rosters are just depleted. In some cases, you've got third or fourth string quarterbacks out there because the other guys have hit the portal. Do you think the NCAA needs to do something in terms of changing dates and deadlines and when it's allowed to hit the portal and when you're allowed to commit and so on and so forth? Do you think they need to look at this again? Because it's almost, in my opinion, it's almost like why play these bowl games if the teams are a fraction of what they used to be?
It's interesting because it's probably only going to get worse because of the expanded college football playoffs. So games are going to go deeper into January. I think that the best course of action they could take would probably move the season up a little bit, or maybe everybody plays week 0 and you have conference championship games Thanksgiving weekend. Because I know people talk about the college football calendar and all that, and the portal's open in December, but it aligns with the academic calendar. I mean, if players are going to transfer, they need to transfer between semesters and be enrolled at their schools in January. So if you were to postpone this portal window, you'd be doing it in January at the time when players need to have their schools picked and enrolled in classes and all that. So there's not a great alternative it seems to me, other than to move maybe the season up by a couple of weeks, or just deal with thinner rosters for bowl games and maybe have more underclassmen playing in them.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I don't know what the answer is either, but it's, I'm watching bowl. I saw there was one story out there that a program was actually paying the third string quarterback to stay on the roster so that they had a legitimate quarterback to play in the game. And he talked him out of it. He said he was going to delay his entrance into the portal and commit somewhere else so that he would play in the game. Anyway, it is a crazy time, but Joey, great stuff. Really appreciate the insight into Kyle McCord. We appreciate you coming on, and happy holidays to you.
You too as well. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch. And with that, phone lines now open the rest of the way. 315-437-7644. What do you think about Kyle McCord coming to Syracuse? What do you think about all this momentum Fran Brown has in the recruiting world? We're going to take a time out here. We're back after this on ESPN Radio.
This is